Good morning, sisters and brothers in Christ. It is so good to be here with you this morning. And just before I launch into the message for today, I wanted to say a thank you to all of you. Reverend Deb and I are enjoying our time so far at Shaughnessy Heights United Church, and you have offered us an amazing welcome and lots of generosity. And for that, we are greatly pleased and greatly thankful for. So thank you. And as we make our way through the weeks, we will be in contact with many of you, hopefully, and we're open to invitations for phone calls or backyard visits if you feel comfortable. We'd love to do that as well. Today I thought I'd try something different. I thought I'd bring us all into this familiar space, this space that we love so much at Shaughnessy Heights United Church, with this gorgeous window and chancel behind us. You will notice, though, that my voice has a bit of an echo, a little reverb, maybe we might say. And that's because I'm in a big sanctuary, of course, and using my preaching voice. I'll try and tone my voice down, but the other thing is I have a new camera on a new phone, and I can't adjust the volume of the microphone. So it's picking up everything, and you'll hear some bounce off the wall directly in front of me and around me. But I invite you, if it's too much, just to turn your volume down a bit, and you should still be able to hear my voice. It was worth a try, and I think it's really neat to be able to preach to you from inside this sanctuary that has been filled with so much love and so much spirit over many generations. In our passage from Matthew 10, verses 24 to 39, Jesus is in full teaching modes. He keeps offering up pithy little statements, almost proverbs, to the disciples before sending them out into the world. He offers them up these little teachings like many of the great master teachers across the world. This is this, listen to this, here's this. Nice little snapshots. Little lessons that at times can seem quite detached, but because in the Christian church we're used to hearing this passage together, we almost feel that they're all one meaning or one message. But we do need to lean in a little closer and hear some of the little lessons inside the greater whole, and that will help us understand Jesus' true message to us. We left off last week's reading with Jesus, his sayings about persecution, but then he interjects a piece about the teacher and the student, then returns to a theme of don't be afraid of those same persecutions that he spoke about earlier. I can hear some of the linear thinkers in the crowd saying to themselves, gee, I wish Jesus would just stick to a lesson plan and stop with the interjections, he's here, he's there, he's all over the map. But that's the way of a great teacher sometimes. And Jesus puts these little interjections in the midst of a great theme of persecution and do not be afraid. He says this in the middle of it all: it is enough for the disciple to be like the teacher. Now, it makes me realize, I don't know about you, it makes me realize we don't often look like the teacher. Could we admit that? We don't often look like the great teacher, Jesus, in our actions and in the living out of our lives. Sometimes, yes, sometimes we get it, but much of the time, no. I think that has to do with power. The Christian church reached too far. We created Christendom. We reached for power and therefore moved away from looking so much like our teacher. Often we're tempted to hear this passage and use it to reinforce that Jesus is on the side of the Christian church. But we forget to first agree to live out what he taught us. We jump right to, well, we're the church, we're Jesus' people, he must be on our side. Far too often we forget to take time to lean in and to deepen under our understanding of what Jesus really was asking us to do before we decide whether we've got it right or not, or whether he's on our side or not. Jesus implores us in this text over and over again to not be afraid of looking like the teacher, of truly living God's way. What does that look like, we have to ask. In the midst of the do not be afraid sayings, he says, what I say to you in the dark, tell in the light. What you hear whispered, proclaim from the rooftops. What a powerful piece. What I say to you in the dark, tell in the light. What you heard whispered, shout from the rooftops. This begs the question, what have we heard? What teachings of Jesus are so powerful or so dangerous that they were taught in the dark? It reminds me of those who would come in the night, the rulers and the rich men, who would come in the night to Jesus because they were too afraid to be witness to his teachings and to be seen listening to Jesus in the light. While we ponder this, our attention may be drawn to the harsh teachings at the end of the passage. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. What? I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For Jesus, he's speaking of a sword of division, a spiritual sword, one might say. And he speaks of the family politic. He says, I'll turn father against son, and mother against daughter, and mother-in-law against daughter-in-law. Note that these divisions that Jesus speaks of in the family are along generational lines. That's because in all cultures, the family is the mini politic, the image, a small image of society at large. So Jesus, in speaking about dividing the family up by generational lines, is also speaking of the larger socio-economic situation, the system of empire in his country, the sense of the way that the Jewish people had created their culture around who had authority, whose property was whom, who owned whom, who was a nobody, and who was a somebody. Jesus is speaking when dividing the household up by generations, he's speaking of a shakeup in social power structures in the whole society. The lesson ends with, whomever loses his life will find it. Life in the first instance is a symbol of the false life we created for ourselves. Those structures and habits, those systems and codes we mistake for life, but are not, in fact, life in God. They are not God's desire for our life on earth as it is in heaven. Jesus claims we need to lose that life, and in doing so, we will gain true life. In my text, I've written it as small L life and big L life. Small L life is the first one we must lose, and big L life is life in God, that Jesus says we will gain when we put the other down. What is the way of Jesus? What does living a life in God look like? What is it that has been taught to us in the dark? These are all great questions on June 21st. This is National Indigenous Peoples Day in Canada, appropriately celebrated every year on the summer solstice. Now, friends, there's lots I will want to unpack with you about the journey of reconciliation in Canada between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. I've dedicated a good portion of my adult life to this work. But today, for now, I am mindful of how the reconciliation journey speaks of the way of Jesus. In fact, I believe that if we truly give ourselves over to the true reconciliation that can happen in Canada, if we dream that dream and live out those actions and pick up our calls to action, that we will actually become closer to what was taught to us in the dark by our great teacher. We will actually look more like the teacher than ever before. That's because in the reconciliation movement and the journey of reconciliation, truth-telling is so important. We as a people need to listen to the truth of our Indigenous, of those Indigenous peoples who join the journey with us. We need to listen to the truth of elders and survivors of the Indian residential school system. We need to listen to the truth of the families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We need to listen to that truth and amplify it for the world. What we hear in the darkness, what we hear whispered to us, spoken to us, the truth that we have heard but have hidden, we need to lift up, bring to the light, and shout from the rooftops so that all of Canada may learn and be healed. And the reconciliation journey is so life-giving. For those of you who've ever joined in a part of this journey, ever picked up a call to action, ever breathed the same air with Indigenous peoples on the road to healing, know how life-giving this journey can be, know how it taps into our deepest, deepest sense of humanity, how it taps into the great light that shines in all of us. And the journey of reconciliation is power challenging, just like the teachings of Jesus, where we were taught, and the disciples were taught, and we were taught again and again, to challenge power, to challenge authority, to challenge the status quo, to challenge the way we think things need to be, to challenge the things that our society clings to with entitlement and privilege, to shake that up, to give it away, to lose the life of power and gain a life in God. This week I heard a beautiful, beautiful passage from Thomas Merton's, one of Thomas Merton's book. It'll come to me. Conjectures of an Innocent Bystander. And he speaks of this. The person reading used this quote. Thomas Merton, the great Catholic mystic, said he was standing on a street corner in Louisville, Kentucky. And as he stood there, he watched people of all cultures, of all races, pass by him. And it dawned on him, it came to him like a great epiphany, a spiritual dawning in his heart, that all of these people were connected to him in God and in the Spirit. And as he moves on through telling the story of all of a sudden becoming awakened to the godliness in everyone, to the unity that we share in God, he says this: there is no way to tell them, you are all shining like the sun. There's no way to tell them, you are all shining like the sun. Now, Thomas Merton says there's no way to tell anybody you are shining like the sun, but I got to tell you, I make a habit of trying. I make a habit of trying to tell people, Christian communities especially, you are shining like the sun. I imagine them when God looks at us, God doesn't see our Sunday clothes. God doesn't see suits or ties or jeans or t-shirts or whatever we wear to church. When God looks at us, God sees bright, shining lights moving through this world, sometimes connecting, but more often not. You are shining like the sun. All of us are shining like the sun. Holding this in our hearts, holding the teachings of Jesus that have been given to us and offered to us, holding these images of love and equality and justice in our heart, and moving toward each other, understanding that we are all shining like the sun, is the journey of reconciliation, and it is the journey of deepening our Christian faith. We are all shining like the sun, every single one of us, but we need to take off our sunglasses. We need to put down our entitlement and our authority and speak into the light what we've only whispered to each other when speaking of our true calling from our great teacher, Jesus. May it be so. Amen.